within the United Nations itself. And we also had side events taking place outside of the UN. And then we had 700 parallel events that were organized by the NGO CSW Forum, which is a civil society organized space for grassroots movements. Excuse me, and I beg your pardon, I had just gotten into it without actually introducing who I am. My name is Rumbi Elizabeth Chidori, and I support regional programs, policy and advocacy for Sonke Gender Justice. I am based in the Johannesburg office, and yeah, thank you very much. And I'm sorry for that. If we can go to the next slide, Jen. Thank you. The priority theme for this CSW was accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. And then the review was really looking at social protection systems, access to public services, and sustainable infrastructure for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. This was derived from the agreed conclusions of the 63rd session. If we can go to the next slide, please. In terms of looking at the negotiations, I'm going to speak to mainly from the debrief from the Women's Rights Caucus, for those that were involved with the Women's Rights Caucus, which is a group that works hand in hand with the NGO CSW in terms of monitoring the negotiations and participating in the negotiations at CSW. If we can go to the next slide. There were a couple of achievements in the negotiation process. It's always quite an intense process when it happens. But this year, particularly, we had the acknowledgement of care, recognizing and reducing and redistributing women's and girls' rights, disproportionate share of unpaid care work and domestic care work. So it is really great that this was included into the agreed conclusions for this year. We also had provisions that spoke to strengthening care and support systems, including the care economy, including things like basic social services, care, support, as well as that collective responsibility involving not only people, but states as well, communities, family, as well as the private sector. So it was quite looking at all the holistic stakeholders in terms of care and not just women and girls. We also had references to sanctions as well, looking at states refraining from promulgating and applying any unilateral economic, financial, or trade measures which are not in accordance with international law. We also had provisions on data, recognizing the need for individual level data. This terminology was introduced for the first time in the CSW agreed conclusions in addressing multidimensional poverty. So it's really great that is in. Going forward, we will need to ensure that this is expanded on and kept within the agreed conclusions. If you can go to the next slide, please. And if I'm going too fast, please just let me know. I'm trying to stick to the required time and make sure that I finish within my stipulated time. We did have provisions relating to SRHR, although there was a lot of pushback, particularly with references to SRHR and CS, comprehensive sexuality education. That is always quite an intense one, and which is hotly debated. But we did have references to gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health rights, which were eventually retained in the text. It's good that we try as much as we can when we do our advocacy with our policymakers from our countries, to try and get them on board so that we ensure that references to SRHR are strongly included within the agreed negotiations, because there's always quite a lot of pushback around these. And I know even in countries that's always quite an issue as well. There were good recommendations that also made it into the text, looking at increasing investments in health technologies, particularly digital health, reducing out-of-pocket spending, and recognizing women's rights to have control over and freely decide on and responsibly on matters relating to their sexuality, including SRHR. We have the strong recommendation in the text that urges all states and the specialized agencies of the UN to continue to support and provide emergency assistance through mechanisms that provide vital services to women and girls living in situations of armed conflict, especially what is happening in the Gaza. I think we've seen a lot of that in the conflict between Israel and Gaza. And also including those subjects that acts or that may amount to war crimes or crimes against humanity and genocide. If we can go to the next slide, please. We also had provisions that were looking at tax, at improving international tax cooperation and curbing illicit financial flows, to especially expand the fiscal space and direct resources to women and girls. We also had provisions that looked at assessing the impacts of tax policies on women and girls, and progressively increasing tax policies with a focus on taxing those that have the highest ability to pay, including via wealth and corporate taxation, and also preventing regressive taxation that disproportionately impacts on women with low or no incomes as well. We also had good provisions that looked at debt as well, improving international debt mechanisms to support debt review, debt payment suspensions, and debt restructuring, and recognizing as well the important role on a case by case basis of debt relief, debt cancellation, debt restructuring, as well as debt crisis prevention, management, and resolution. So it was really great that we had these in the agreed conclusions. Can we go to the next slide as well? There were a few setbacks that were in the negotiation in the agreed conclusions. Particularly, I've spoken to SRHR and CSE. We really need to strengthen the language around SRHR, and these were not strongly as articulated as they could have been, and particularly with the links to poverty. The text does have universal access to healthcare services, including family planning, information and education, SRH, and RRs. And but then the language is not as strong as we would have liked it to be. So we need to ensure that we keep working on that. Also fundamental issues relating to the protection of human rights of LGBTQI persons were not considered in the text. That's also another issue that is always hotly contested in the negotiations process. The text did also not reflect language to condemn foreign occupation, and support specific reference to permanent ceasefire in the Gaza, which had been brought up during the negotiations. So these are just some of the setbacks that we saw. There was a big silence on international trade, linkages to climate change, which disproportionately affects women and girls and pushes them closer or further into poverty, were not clearly developed in the text. The text also did not clearly articulate the need for new, additional, and debt-free climate finance, particularly for global South countries. There was a significant pushback against gender expansive language, with several member states challenging even the long established agreed language on gender in the text. So sometimes, even when you think that you have made wins in terms of having gender language included in the text, you often have to fight to keep it maintained in the text. If you don't do that, it doesn't come back and it can be put out. So that's why it's important to really monitor these closely and be included as much as you can in advocacy or language advocacy for the agreed conclusions. The states keep challenging language on gender-based violence, and there's also little flexibility on issues relating to SRHR. We have to constantly be on the guard with respect to that. If we can go to the next slide. In terms of other news from the negotiations, there was the adoption of the new HIV/AIDS resolution by the Commission during the session. This was a very good resolution in that it aligns with the critical global frameworks such as the 2030 Agenda, particularly Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equality and the empowerment of all girls, the 2021 Political Declaration on HIV/AIDS, and the 2025 HIV and AIDS 10-10-10 targets, which are key enablers for tracking and for getting on track to end HIV/AIDS as a public health by 2030. So that's really a good thing that is coming out of the agreed conclusions. If we can go to the next slide, please. Just in terms of feminist activism that was happening in and around the session, there were two marches that happened at CSW in support of Palestine and in support of a ceasefire in Palestine. This happened on the 14th of March and also on the 21st of March. And we had quite a good number of people who came to support the march, and it was really great to see a lot of NGOs and a lot of support at the session. If we can go to the next slide, please. One other thing that came out of the session, which I think we're all still grappling to deal with, is the fact that Saudi Arabia was elected as the chair for the UN Forum for Women's Rights. Yeah, it's considering that Saudi Arabia is not exactly um the state that has that protects women's rights in a lot of issues. So yeah, we're going to have to work around to see how do we ensure that we don't lose some of the gains that we have had, especially when we have a country which does not necessarily always put forward or prioritize women's rights, and this is the one that is leading the UN Forum. I think we have to connect a lot with a lot of the civil society organizations that are in Saudi Arabia, women's rights organizations, and we can see how to ensure that we protect the language that we have gained over the years. If I can go to the next slide, please. And then in terms of UN Security Resolution 1325, the world is still experiencing a lot of multiple intersecting conflicts and crises, and we have seen particularly the suffering, or particularly those who are affected the most, are women and girls. And thus it's important to ensure that we're supporting feminist movements, we're supporting local peace builders to ensure that we try as much as we can to end war, militarism, and foreign occupation and genocide. And this was reflected in the communications that were coming in from the Women's Rights Caucus. And I urge all of us to go to the schools as well, to retweet and to support the hashtags that are coming from the Women's Rights Caucus. Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, this is the last slide for me. And let me end there, and I'll be taking questions later on. Thank you, Jenny. Over to you.
Rumbi, thank you so much for leading us through that great debrief, overall debrief and look on what took place at CSW from the broader movements. Thank you very much. Maybe we can move into the next section, and just to share, we will be sharing this presentation with all of you who have registered after the meeting, so you can have access to it and take a deeper look. We know we're sharing a lot of information with you quickly, so just acknowledging that. And also that we will have a Q&A at the end. So we'll have some time, no, for any of your questions. But please do begin sharing any questions, comments, or reflections that you may have in the chat box. Thank you very much. And wonderful. So let's take a bit of a dive into Men Engage Alliance at CSW68, as well as the broader inclusion, no, of political nuanced men and masculinities lens within the session. And I'll just quickly debrief on some of the main activities. And I'd like to invite my colleagues Fidel and Raymond to join me in this section to share also about their experiences at CSW as being part of the official delegation of their countries. We'll be hearing a bit from them, but also as organizers and participants in various sessions. So let me quickly go through the debrief. In terms of the Alliance, we had 75 participating members, with many more joining virtually. And there was about 18 parallel and side events in which Men Engage members were active speakers, participating and organizing in. And we were able to engage also 25 members in doing lobbying with their governments on the agreed conclusions. We had one colleague, Tricia, who was part of the Men Engage Alliance Youth Reference Group, who joined the Youth Forum at CSW. And 4 members this year were part of their official national delegations. We'll speak later on in terms of how we can see about becoming a member of our national delegations when we look at post-CSW advocacy and the look ahead. We also ran a campaign, We Won't Wait, and sharing specific political statements related to this year's priority theme from a men and masculinities lens, with quite a lot of engagement. We had, of course, Men Engage Alliance members participating in both parallel events and side events. We'll connect a bit on what came out of those. And we had 2 caucus meetings, an opening caucus with the intention of strategizing together on the first day of the opening of CSW, and then a midpoint caucus to reflect on what we had heard and what was happening and unfolding organically over the course of the first week. And of course, today marks the closing session where we're debriefing on the outcomes of the session as a whole. And of course, we had members actively within their delegations, participating within the negotiations of the agreed conclusions, and many other delegation-related activities. And maybe I'll pause there before going into a bit of an exploration of the actual language on men and masculinities within the agreed conclusions. We can zoom in on that in a second. But maybe I can begin by inviting Raymond. Maybe you can just share with us a bit about your experience at CSW, being part of the delegation. Take a moment to introduce yourself, and looking forward to learning from you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. My name is Raymond Havwala from Zambia Center for Communication Programs. I am the male involvement technical advisor, and basically leading in terms of male involvement in our country. And Zambia Center for Communication Programs basically is a member of the Men Engage Alliance, Zambia Alliance here in Zambia. So basically in terms of our engagement at CSW68, first and foremost, as an organization, we have a very good working relationship with the government of the Republic of Zambia. So when we started planning for the side event, which on the Coaching Boys in 2 men, the government basically, they are the ones that invited us, because we're an expert organization where men and engagement of men and boys is concerned. And the background to this is in last year's United Nations General Assembly, the government of the Republic of Zambia did a side event, and it was focusing on the girls. And it is out of that response from the member countries that requested that Zambia equally needed to present on what is happening with regards to engaging men and boys. So they approached us as an expert organization who were already doing this in the country for us to be able to have this side event, which was co-hosted between ourselves and the Department of Office of the President under the Gender Division. So we began by first and foremost planning with them here in terms of the issues which we needed to have. And also we agreed in terms of the issues that we needed to deliver to them in terms of what were the most important issues. For instance, engaging men and boys. It was one of the issues that we wanted to make sure that it's very visible at this CSW. And secondly, in terms of the planning itself, the delegation itself, we had to make sure to make sure that the ministries that we are working with, first and foremost, we are working with the Ministry of Education, where we are implementing the Coaching Boys in Two Men intervention. Was equally involved and equally on the delegation, government delegation that was traveling. Also, the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Art is equally involved in terms of the planning and also a part of the delegation of the people that were traveling to go and have this side event at CSW. And then whilst we were there, we had to make sure that every morning with the Zambian delegation, we could sit and plan on a daily basis in terms of the side events that we needed to attend, and also the issues that we needed to advance. So the issues to do with men engage, when we received that the men engager was interested to advance. It is at the morning briefing every morning at the Zambian mission, permanent mission in the UN, where we could sit and basically allocate ourselves and also just raise the issues in terms of what we needed to address. And it is at that particular point in time where the lobbying, the discussion on the issue was done, and also the position of government and on how they would want to negotiate that position. And once that position is agreed in those meetings, the permanent representative, together with the Zambian delegation that had come from Zambia, we could go and have these issues input in the document. And then every morning, again, we could come and report back in terms of how the issue went and also what are some of the early challenges that we were facing, and also in terms of how best can we actually advance our issues. So we were very lucky because myself and our executive director, Mr. Johannes Mtonga, we were focused much on male involvement because of the side events that we were posed to present during this CSW. So the issues that we were receiving from the global men engage in terms of the language, these were the issues actually which we were discussing and we were advancing during our planning meetings with the mission in Zambia. But then also my experience is this, that most of these issues, I think they start way back, first at SADC level, then they move to AU level, and then now they move to the Africa position. So I think it is at that particular point in time, I think we need to actually bring in our strong advocacy issues from probably our government, like from the government of Zambia. We would want that the advocate issues already, when we're planning here, we already put them in our planning. We already advance and discuss them. As we go there, it will be much, much more easier than to actually introduce the language at CSW. even be one of the organization or the government that could actually push for us to do that. So we did our side event. It was a very good side event. We had a lot of good response from the stakeholders. And actually what we have received is Africa Union have requested us to do this Coaching Boys in Two Men side event. And also at the ONGA, they have requested that we equally go ahead and do this side event on the Coaching Boys in Two Men. So that was our experience on CSW. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Raymond. You raised so many interesting points and really honing in on one in particular that I think we'll be able to discuss moving forward. How once we get to CSW, our advocacy is limited in a way because the national position has fed into a regional position that's been consolidated. So governments arrive at CSW with a regional positioning, no? So that our advocacy really needs to begin early. Wonderful to hear, that your government was open to your feedback as a civil society organization. We've heard in the past, that it's just a wide range of experiences of civil society within their government delegation. So wonderful that there was collaboration there and a willingness, to uptake inputs, as we're seeing a context of increased closed space and sometimes tokenistic engagements within the delegation by CSO experts, no? Thank you so much. Maybe over to Fidel. Fidel, would you like to join us for the conversation? Please take a moment to introduce yourself. Looking forward to learning from you.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Fidel Rutaisire. I am the Executive Director at the Rwanda Men's Resource Center, known as RWAMREC, which is also the coordinator or the secretariat of the Rwanda Men Engage Network. So I was happy to be part of the Rwandan delegation at CSW, and I'm honored to share my experience as a member of the Rwandan government delegation at CSW68, where I had the privilege of seeing both advantages and challenges of becoming or being a member of a government delegation. So first of all, for the case of Rwanda, we have started the engagement before the CSW. So the government actively engages civil society organizations prior to CSW, and at national level, this pre-CSW meeting provides a platform for civil society organizations to advocate for various matters. For instance, for our case, remember in the pre-CSW, we highlighted the importance of including men and masculinities in the interventions of Rwanda as a whole country, and the Minister of Gender and Family Promotion has given a buy-in. She has accepted to an extent that even in her speech, which she presented to the General Assembly at CSW, men and masculinities were part of her speech. So the engagement started before the CSW. So now, being part of a government delegation gives many advantages. For instance, it grants access to the prestigious D pass, or the badge, which is designated for diplomats. As you all know, with this pass, you gain entry to all corners of the UN rooms, while civil society organizations do not have access to many or to all areas in the UN headquarters. So in the case of Rwanda, our permanent mission in New York had collected the badges from the UN registration desk, and it distributes them to delegates from Rwanda. And this helps us to really not go to have a long queue at the registration desk. So you all know how long it is to stand at the UN registration desk. So when you are part of the government, so you go to your embassy, they give you the pass, and you continue without any problem. So again, membership in a government delegation provides access to valuable information and network typically reserved for government representatives. And as a member of civil society organizations, attending CSW as part of government delegation, you also enjoy visibility, but also credibility. So for instance, for the case of Rwanda, the Embassy of Rwanda in New York entrusted us to represent Rwanda in many sessions at CSW, offering us a platform to advocate for various causes. So in other words, we had an opportunity to influence. For instance, we could share our views on CSW conclusions with our embassy, and the embassy could influence easily the committee which was drafting the conclusions. So another important thing is that we were also granted the use of the meeting rooms at the Rwandan embassy in New York. And I remember when I went to the main engaged caucus meeting, I saw how the venue was very small. And I realized the potential to secure a larger meeting room at our embassy for future events. So basically, we started the engagement before the CSW, but also while in New York, we represented the embassy, the government into many sessions, but also we had many side events, and the government and its stakeholders were supporting us. So basically, there are many advantages of being part of the government delegation. However, alongside these opportunities, there are, of course, some challenges to consider. Some of those challenges are actually, for instance, balancing about independence. As you all know, civil society organizations cherish their autonomy, and being part of a government delegation may raise concerns about compromising this independence or appearing aligned with government agendas, potentially affecting credibility and autonomy. So the second challenge or disadvantage is about accountability concerns. So accountability concerns also arise when civil society members participate in government delegations. As you all know, there is a perception that when we represent not only our organization, but also the government, the interest of government, actually, it's not easy to represent the interests of your civil society organizations, because when you are part of a government delegation, you tend to represent the government interest, leading to questions regarding transparency and accountability to our constituents and also stakeholders. So in conclusion, while being part of a government delegation at CSW offered invaluable opportunities and advantages, it also presented challenges that require careful navigation to ensure continued effectiveness and integrity in advocacy effort. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Fidel. You raised such important points. It's bringing to mind, as you mentioned first, the opportunities, just this access, no? and how the Women's Rights Caucus was reporting that on the first days of the negotiation, they didn't even have access without the D badge, the delegate badge, to the floor in which the negotiations were taking place. So they were unable to begin their lobby, which usually happens outside of the negotiation room as they wait for representatives to come out so that they can catch them and share their political opinions on how the negotiation is unfolding. So you raised such a good point, and leading into the challenges, how to ensure that we maintain accountability to governments, or hold governments to account and maintain our independence as civil society. And also for us as Men Engage, this additional consideration of making sure we utilize this opportunity to be on delegations to continue to advance accountable advocacy, which is sharing not just our inputs on men and masculinities, but some of the broader feminist, LGBTIQ, youth, climate justice agendas. Thank you very much. That was so informative. Just cognizant of time, I'll move forward. So very quickly, just honing in for a few minutes on the negotiations. We already went through the broader analysis from our feminist colleagues at the Women's Rights Caucus, and now we'll zoom in on the language on men and masculinities. So just quickly, we had 30 members that participated in preparing the technical inputs. We were able to lobby quite a few governments with those inputs, which we're always seeking to have not more language on men and masculinities, but deeper, richer, political, nuanced, intersectional feminist analysis on men and masculinities, and we had contributions to 3 rounds of the agreed conclusions. The negotiation keeps moving through different versions of the document, so we were able to input into 3 of those. And as we mentioned, we had 4 members with this access to their delegations who really were able to support and influencing directly with their governments on the language on men and masculinities and the feminist agenda more broadly. So what was in the language on men and masculinities? There was 2 paragraphs in the end that made it in that were dedicated to this lens. And on paragraph 51, we see a recognition of the need, importance for the full engagement of men and boys as agents and beneficiaries of change and as strategic partners and allies in gender equality, and the need to engage men and boys in combating and eliminating gender stereotypes, sexism, negative social norms that fuel discrimination and violence, including sexual and gender-based violence. This was important because that term was contested really strongly in this year's negotiation, but it was able to make it into this paragraph. Also noting the need to educate children from a young age on gender equality, human rights, and culture of peace and nonviolent behavior and respectful relationships. We had recommended there the inclusion of especially young men and boys. And also paragraph TTT, that we need to fully engage men and boys by understanding and addressing the root causes of gender inequality, which really include unequal power relations, and the need to design and implement national policies and programs that address the roles and responsibilities of men and boys, including as a central theme of this year's session, the equal sharing of responsibilities and care and domestic work, and just to eliminate social norms that condone violence against women and girls. I should say that overall what made it in was quite a diluted and depoliticized language on men and masculinities. We were really striving to have the language continue to nuance, and much of what we recommended, advocated for, did not make it in. So in some ways, we just wanted to stress the setbacks in a way to our advocacy efforts, because we had really been striving to have language included that was much more political, including the need to engage men and boys to combat and eliminate gender stereotypes, unequal relations, and to name, not just working with men and boys, but to begin to shift patriarchal masculinities, institutions, and systems. And to really hone in and acknowledge, that violence is rooted in the ideology of men's entitlement and privilege over women, and the need to assert male control or power, leading to the justification, normalization, condonement, and perpetuation of violence and stigmatization, of victims and survivors. And also on the need to dismantle harmful norms around masculinities. And on that paragraph where it addresses on the need to educate young people, including men and boys, especially men and boys, to add this element of care for others and the environment, as an essential educational point to achieve, a more caring, just, and peaceful world, not just for people, but for planet. And also just on the need to refrain from, for men and boys, to refrain from and condemn all forms of sexism, misogyny, discrimination, and violence against all women, girls, and very importantly, gender nonconforming people. We know that the rights of LGBTIQ people and the acknowledgement of that within the agreed conclusions is an ongoing battle that is very intense, and it rarely is able to make it in. So we were really advocating for that within the paragraphs of men and boys. And just understanding the harmful effects of patriarchal masculinities for victims and survivors and society as a whole, and ensuring that men take responsibility and are held accountable for their behavior, and that any programs on engaging men and boys are centered on accountability to women's rights, youth, LGBTIQ movements, agendas, voices. So that was a really important point that did not make it in. Again, we will share this presentation with you so you can take a look at this in depth. I know we just shared a lot, so thank you for listening. Wonderful. So maybe we'll just go to a quick update on youth leadership and engagement at CSW. I'm going to invite my colleague Irene here. If you could jump on and introduce yourself to participants, and thanks so much. We look forward to learning from you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sure. I'll request to be off video because my bandwidth is a bit low. So I would just like to give an update, but be off video. So we can't end this conversation without really touching bases on uh, providing an analysis of youth engagement at the CSW, and just looking at more broadly around youth sessions, youth spaces, and organizing key outcomes and reflections from the youth participation in the youth forum. Particularly, that is a very beautiful photo portrayed on the screen, projected on the screen from the CSW Youth Forum, that is the 68th CSW. So we have to acknowledge that during the CSW 68, youth leadership and participation played a really significant role in shaping the conversation and outcomes of the conference. Youth delegates from all over the world brought fresh perspectives, innovative ideas, and sense of urgency to discussions. Um, and really to different sessions as well. And these discussions were around gender equality and women's empowerment and youth engagement. So one of the key opportunities of youth leadership and participation at CSW was the creation of dedicated spaces and sessions for young people to engage in meaningful dialogues and networking. So for the longest time, young people have been asking for spaces, but we do acknowledge that the 68th CSW did provide a space for the young people to also network and have meaningful dialogues, not just having this dialogue, but also leading some of these dialogues. And these spaces provided youth delegates with opportunities to amplify their voices, share their experiences, and even connect with like minded individuals across the globe. So just to mention a few examples of how youth or some of the sessions that youth led or some of the sessions that even other organizations focus mainly on the young people at the CSW68 is one of them is empowering young women and girls, breaking barriers to gender equality. This session was led by Gallup. And then we also had youth activism and advocacy for gender equality, which was led by Plan International. We had innovative approaches to promoting gender equality in education. This was led by Malala Fund. And then we had youth-led solutions for ending gender-based violence. This was directly led by the UN Women. And we had, last but not least, we had um, Youth Voices in Policy Making for Gender Equality, which was led by Youth Coalition. This is an international organization that advocates for the rights and health of young people. So with all this, youth-led organizing also did play a very crucial role in mobilizing young people to advocate for issues that are important to them. So youth delegates organized events, workshops, and side events to showcase their work and also share best practices and build solidarity within the youth community. So this grassroots organizing did help to draw attention to the perspective and the needs of young people, ensuring that their voices were heard and considered in the discussion at the CSW68. But despite all these opportunities for the youth leadership and participation, we cannot go without mentioning a few challenges that we did face during the CSW68. So one of the main challenges was the lack of inclusivity and representation of the marginalized youth groups. This includes young people from developing countries. Of course, it goes back to the visa issues. It was held in the US. It's a very cumbersome process to acquire these visas. You have to start in time, so some people missed out. And then we also had underrepresentation of indigenous communities, the LGBTQ community, and people with disability. It is essential for us to ensure that all voices are represented and included in spaces such as CSW and even beyond CSW in discussions on gender equality and women empowerment. In terms of key outcomes and reflections of youth participation in the Youth Forum, youth delegates played a crucial role in shaping the outcome, documents, and contributing to the discussions on the priority theme of the CSW. So the outcome documents, for those who might not have clarity, uh, are the outcome documents of the 68th session of the Commission of the Status of Women, that is the CSW 68. It highlights the importance of advancing gender equality and empowering women and girls, particularly in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. We all know what COVID did, it came, and what it did and how it disoriented CSO organizations from organizing from the grassroots to the even regional and global level. We all did have these harsh experiences. So this particular document recognizes the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women and girls, including increased rates of violence, economic insecurities, and barriers to accessing essential services. It also does call for action to address these challenges and emphasizes on the need for inclusive and gender responsive recovery efforts. This particular document also reaffirms the commitment of member states to the 2023-2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and calls for accelerated implementation of these agreements to advance gender equality and women empowerment. The document also does emphasize on the importance of intersectionality and the inclusion of diverse voices and experiences in decision-making processes. And with all this, we also have to acknowledge that that particular document also calls for the strengthening of partnerships and collaborations between government, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders to advance gender equality and women's rights. So the outcome of this document of CSW 68 underscores the urgent need to address the gender disparity exacerbated by the pandemic and to work towards a more equitable and inclusive future for all. Specifically, the Youth Forum, it is an annual, if those who might not have an understanding of this is, but just to break it down, this is an annual event that brings together young people all over the world from to discuss and address issues related to gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. It also provides a platform for young activists, advocates, and leaders to share their experiences, ideas, solutions on how to advance gender equality and women's rights. Provide so this year's CSW's Youth Forum did provide a platform for young people to share their recommendations, advocate for their rights, and also call for action on issues such as education, employment, health, and violence against women. Additionally, youth leadership and participation at the CSW highlighted the importance of intergenerational dialogue and collaboration. So, by including youth voices in discussions on gender equality and women's empowerment, older generations, for lack of a better word, are able to gain fresh perspectives and learn from the experiences of young people and work together towards a more inclusive and sustainable future. Furthermore, the engagement of young people at the CSW68 helped to challenge some stereotypes and break down barriers related to age and gender. By showcasing their leadership skills, passion, and dedication to the cause, young youth delegates demonstrated that age is not a barrier to making meaningful contributions to important discussions and decision making processes. In conclusion, the active participation of young people at the CSW68 showcased the power of youth leadership in advancing gender equality and women's empowerment. So, by continuing to support and amplifying the voices of young activists, organizations, and advocates, even within your own spaces, we are simply working towards a more inclusive and equitable world for all. So overall, youth leadership and participation at CSW 68 were really instrumental in elevating the voices of young people and influencing the outcomes of the conference. So moving forward, it is really essential to continue prioritizing youth engagement, ensuring inclusivity and representation of all young youth groups, and empowering young people to drive positive change in their fight for gender equality and women's empowerment. I will stop there. Over to you, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Irene, for that wonderful recap on youth leadership and engagement at CSW. One of the main sessions, joint sessions we organized as Men Engage, was an intergenerational dialogue this year, really seeking to learn from youth leaders about how to continue to engage men and boys in intersectional feminist agendas and agendas for feminist systems change. It was a wonderful session, and we will be able to share a video with all of you of some of the outcomes from that discussion. Wonderful. Let's move on, noting the time, and I'll be really brief on this section. Of course, as we know, there continued to be quite organized and consolidated backlash within CSW. We know all of you are experiencing it in contextual ways within your own countries, regions, and of course, it's still taking place within CSW as well. There's an effort by the Women's Rights Caucus, which, as Rumbi was sharing, is the main political collective, feminist collective that advocates at CSW. And they do quite an extensive effort of opposition monitoring, which means tracking all of the statements that are submitted to CSW from organizations that are advancing a regressive or anti-rights agenda, monitoring all of the events that are organized by them, attending many of them to take notes, also noting linkages between these civil society organizations that are advancing anti-rights narratives and their collaboration with governments that are doing the same. Again, this year was no different, unfortunately, than years prior. We continue to see quite a strong push at CSW by a lot of these anti-rights narratives, actions, and mobilizations. When we share the presentation with you, there's quite an extensive set of slides where you can look much more in depth what took place in the opposition monitoring. But for the sake of time, just noting we're a bit late, I'll just hone in on a few of the narratives that we saw emerging, which really hone in on parental rights, parental control, and curtailing young people's autonomy. So the heterocentric view of the natural family, the issue of the family, and maintaining it as a strict, stereotypical male patriarch, right, and woman family unit is quite an issue, but also many things that we continue to see is governments, for example, pushing on this issue of sovereignty, which is used as a way to evade responsibilities of international commitments to human rights by stating there's sovereignty for them to advance what is in alignment with their own national policies. And a lot of platforming of the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which is an anti-abortion collective. One of the main strategies of opposition groups is co-opting a lot of the language, a lot of the techniques and strategies of progressive civil society, and this Geneva Consensus Declaration, which is a collective of governments who signed on to advancing anti-abortion legislation within their own countries. Sounds very official, as if it was agreed upon multilateral declaration from Geneva. So it's just a good example of how these groups co-opt language so that it makes it sound more official. And of course, an ongoing push against LGBTIQ rights, comprehensive sexuality education. We see this both in the events, the themes of the events that are hosted by civil society and governments, and also what is happening within the negotiation space, where we have blocks of governments that are advancing these narratives, and lines of advocacy, shall we say, regressive advocacy within the negotiation space itself. Again, there's quite more extensive information on opposition monitoring, which we will share when we share the slides. So just skipping forward so we can get to the Q&A as well. So just quickly, let's touch base on now what, we're post CSW. What advocacy and follow-up can we contemplate doing as the session is closed? And I'd like to invite my colleague Nyasha. Nyasha, if you don't mind coming in and sharing who you are and then leading us through this section, we look forward to learning from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny, and everyone who has spoken before me. I'm Nyasha Fansasole, Program Officer with the Global Secretariat, Program Officer, Youth Leadership and Engagement. And this has been quite an interesting session to hear all the feedback. And Fidel, let me say I can relate on the conflict of actually being part of the government delegation and also wanting to represent the civil society. It's really not easy. And but it's a very interesting way that we can go around with our advocacy. So you can put the next slide for me. So now I'm just going to run us through and to just highlight a bit probably what could be our thinking as we're talking about the next steps towards CSW69, obviously. So I think the issue around the agreed conclusions has been shared about, and what would be the next steps is we believe that countries will receive the agreed conclusion that are then translated in policies and actions. At least that's what we believe should be the ideal thing that happens after CSW, that after every agreed conclusion, the countries get to receive and they maybe embed this in already existing policies and actions, either at country or regional level. And talking about regional level, I think we have an opportunity to actually follow up with this current CSW, considering the processes that are even ongoing around ICPD plus 30, and also next year Beijing plus 30 as well. So countries are also going to then be expected to report on what they would have done in relation to the theme at the agreed annual session. So what we could be doing as we keep on following on these agreed conclusions for this CSW is to advocate for legislation and other reforms to implement the recommendation. So we still had quite a lot of advocates work to do right now, because at some point, even if you might have access to your country delegation and check if they have reconvened after CSW to even share about the agreed conclusions, you might find out they might not even have. So I think the greatest advocates points we can think about is figure out if these are now known within our respective governments and even within the respective feminist and civil society spaces in our countries for further follow-up. Then also engage with the consultation with government. That's what I was just talking about. Say we need to think about it, like how do we follow up and look at whether this information, the agreed conclusions, have really reached our constituents, including the governments, to act on them. And we also need to probably think about monitoring on the recommendations and contribute to written reports. So as we know that there are different reports that our government sometimes are meant to come up with. Some of them include even that periodic universal review, UPR. Some of them may include reports that probably, if there is an open and transparent way that your government works around things, when the presidents are going for the annual UNGA assembly. So we might be looking at those opportunities for us to be able, to gather even sort of a shadow reporting in terms of the CSW agreed conclusions and how they are being implemented. Then documenting and reporting human rights situations. I think this is very important as we're talking about how we want to be dealing with anti-gender and anti-human rights movements. We can see the wave that's currently happening not only in Africa but globally even, and how this is really disturbing in terms of how we uphold our human rights, and how when we talk about human rights, we also get up to link about women's rights, which is something that at CSW we keep constantly pushing about. So we need to also think about how we can continue to monitor and track these human rights situations within our context, and then tabling them so that when we get to the next CSW, we also know how this backlash is playing around. Then utilize the adopted language, policy making, and policy proposals. I feel like as part of the feminist movement, which is also constituted of civil society organizations and various advocate organizations, what we could also do as a way forward in terms of following up is, now that we have the agreed conclusions, we might be thinking about using the actual language from the agreed conclusions, even in our recommendations, policy recommendations, in our advocacy, in our policy proposals, or even when you are doing your own resource mobilization for proposals. So that will spark this kind of recognition that if it's a nationwide project and they're seeing this kind of language probably around CSW68 and the resolution, that can also ensure that our governments are really taking it, that we are aware of what they're supposed to be delivering on. And then we can also start to make advocates for the incorporation in the policy making. Then we also need to think about continue advocating for the inclusion of men and boys through intersectional feminist approaches centering accountability. So I think the kind of like resistance that we continue facing when we talk about inclusion of men and boys from an intersectional approach is mostly it's construed as if we are bringing the conversation, what about men and boys, of which we are trying to reconstruct this to say we are not bringing in conversation about what about men and boys, but what can men and boys do to change the situation, and how can we hold, especially with the theme we're using at SW, men in leadership accountable. So we also need to continue to be talking and using that kind of lens whenever we do end write-ups and recommendations that also include CSW68 follow-ups and also upcoming CSW69. And I'll be happy to hear or see some thoughts maybe in the chat on what else we can think about doing as we are moving on with the planning and the follow-up of CSW67. Next slide, if it's still mine. So Choice for Youth and Sexuality is one of the youth-led organizations that we have really been kind of like partnering ad hocly with Men Engage, especially with the Men Engage Youth Reference Group in organizing some activities. And they've really, shaped out some of the things that we can think about when we talk about the next CSW. Because I think with CSW, because it's a yearly thing, once we are done like this, when we're following up on the resolutions, we also need to be thinking about CSW69. So it might seem as if we're like, no, it's too early, we can't be thinking. But if you look at this timeline that we have, which shows that it's like a cycle, right? And I can start maybe below where it's written CSW. So there's the start of CSW where we have all the conversations, the moment where we've just been, right? But then after CSW, if you check that the timeline on the right side is starting November, December, January, February. This doesn't mean that before November, no activities are happening. So I will safely say from now, which is April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, some things are happening in terms of national level follow-up, documenting the commitments, following them up. Then when we do this follow-up, it also helps us contextualize how we're seeing CSW69 because we already have the theme. So whilst we're following up, this can help us then when we talk about starting in November, December, January, February, when the CSW Bureau Expert Working Group starts to meet and contextualize everything, where we see the applications for oral statements are open, applications for submitted written statements, applying towards side events, national and international civil society briefings, zero draft outcomes around February. And then there's UN Women CSW Youth Forum that's now encroaching almost in CSW time around March. So you will notice that for us to be able to then effectively also engage in CSW69, it means we're able to follow up during this period up to around November, and we actually concretize what we hope should be reflecting when it comes to the zero draft in February next year. But then we start now November, December, when we even do submissions for side events, we already have a scope of this is what we have followed up from the resolutions of CSW68, and we feel CSW69 should have this direction. So this would show us like the intensity of the preparations, which is around November to February, but also not forgetting the current periods that we are in. And if I've missed something, I'm sure people who are in the call, you also might know some of the processes that even plug in during this cycle that we've adopted. Please feel free to also just contribute or even add in the chat box. Next. Okay, is this still my section, Jenny? Or this is now back to you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Nyasha. I think maybe we can just be really brief on this section. I'm happy to just share one slide because we really want to hear from you. And thank you for your patience as we had so many wonderful colleagues sharing their experiences, but we're really looking forward to hearing on yours. So maybe just to add one point to what Nyasha has shared, we looked at that slice of the circle where CSW has ended, and now we're going into the post CSW / preparation for CSW69. And so just to highlight two things, next year is an important year because it's another commemoration year. And pardon, I'm seeing Beijing plus 25, it's Beijing plus 30. So it's a particular year in the sense that CSW69 will not negotiate a theme per se. It's going to be a look back, on progress in the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action after 30 years. What have we advanced? Where are there still gaps? Where's there backsliding, So it's going to be a really important year too, because instead of an agreed conclusions document, there will be a political declaration next year. And that political declaration is really going to be built upon the review processes that take place at regional level and the political articulations that come out, the political documents that come out from regional level. So the political declaration at CSW69 will be a compilation of the review from each of the regions on progress, gaps, backsliding, in the advancement of the Beijing Platform for Action 30 years since it was implemented. So there's actually an extra emphasis on influencing, that the regional positions are really, nuanced, political, have a really clear articulation of what has been happening in the region. And so that will feed into the final political declaration that will take place at CSW. So we just wanted to really encourage you to stay connected to when that regional review process is taking place, and to maybe think about how to work alongside broader movements who are advocating within that space to make sure that what comes out of there is really going to be advancing a political analysis of where we stand and what needs to happen to accelerate the progress of the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. And last point before we pass it over to you is that we've already heard of one of the regions beginning to organize. This is the UNESA region, which incorporates Europe, United States, Canada, And so they are already scheduled to begin in-person meeting October 2024 in Geneva, which will include expert roundtables. So we'll continue to share information with you as these come forward so that you can link up to and think about participating or at least providing your inputs if one or two representatives from the region organize to go. Because again, stressing the importance of those spaces. And if you want to be engaged in this, maybe the best thing to do is check in at national level. Is there a review process already taking place at national level? If you're interested in the regional preparatory processes, official preparatory processes for CSW, where the political regional declarations will be negotiated. You can also link up to your regional advocacy working groups to see if they're planning to organize around it, sending a representative and asking to support by sharing your inputs. And the global advocacy working group as well within the Alliance will be monitoring these processes, monitoring outcomes from each of the regional convenings as we move towards CSW69. Thank you so much. I stopped there. You've heard a lot. Thank you so much to all speakers for sharing your expertise and experiences at CSW, but we would just like to hear from all of you. Were you at CSW? Would you like to share any reflections? Do you have any questions for any of the speakers or participants at CSW? Any comments or insights? So I'll stop sharing now and feel free to raise your hand or just unmute and step forward. We're really looking forward to your feedback, insights, and comments. I think we shared so much. Yeah, maybe there's nothing left to be said, although I'm sure there's much more to share. Let's see, Zanele just sharing, seeing your comment. Do you want to share that out loud? Because it's such an interesting point, if you feel comfortable.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Zanele Makombe. I'm with Ektubumbano. I'm based in South Africa. I'm a Zimbabwean national. Just to say, one of the things that I appreciated really was the opportunity for us as community members to be part of this delegation, because it also enabled us to engage with the different other partners from different sections in the side events, especially which were organized by CSOs. But for me, it was also an opportunity to see the link between, this global advocacy and national advocacy and the possibility of my role in engaging with local people to start influencing at that particular level before it even gets to the negotiation table. So I saw that as a valuable space. But also I saw it as an opportunity for me to also learn around broader discussions that are there at that level. And also, how do we translate some of the languaging that was shared or that's shared to local levels so that I'm able to speak to my communities using some of this language, some of this jargon? How do we also start breaking it down so that it's relevant also to the people that I live with? Thank you very much.
It's such an excellent point. Thank you very much on providing inputs into these processes, just to acknowledge how so often they are constricted because there's so much to understand of how to even share your political inputs to a process like this. So there's a bit of a barrier to entry, you know, to being able to do that. You need to understand how the process works, and yeah, to know where best to know provide your insights. And then your point on how technocratic, no, so much of the language coming out of these multilateral negotiations can be, and how do we then feed that back, no, to all of our colleagues and stakeholders. I think this is something we chew on ongoingly, because it's just such a great point and an ongoing challenge. No, thanks so much for raising that. Maybe after you engage in that process after CSW, you can come back and share with us how that went, no? And your experiences and learnings in doing so. Anyone else want to share any thoughts, questions, comments? I'm just not seeing anyone, so just to share, then we will follow up, as mentioned, with the presentation, so you can take a more in-depth look at that, as Nyasha guided us through the post-CSW timeline, no? We will be reaching out sometime in about 6 months to begin our strategizing towards CSW69. And also we'll be sharing information about the regional preparatory processes with the Global Advocacy Working Group, the regional advocacy working groups, and sharing it on the listserv for all members. So look out for more information so you can get stay up to date, no, in terms of how all of these pre-CSW69 processes are going. And if you wish to engage, to Zanelle's point, no, I think understanding a little bit like what's happening between now and CSW69, where the right spaces of influence will be, can really facilitate us then organizing, no, and being able to then provide our inputs towards those processes. I'm just seeing Androgynous, how can we initiate the conversation at national level as youth? Yeah, great question. I think in some ways, I don't know if anyone would like to address that. Nyasha, maybe, do you want to share your thoughts on how to do that? Yeah, I'm just thinking one thing to remember is you're probably not the only actor, right? Initiating conversations about CSW. Check around, see with other youth groups, organizations, or networks taking place at national level to see if there's already a conversation happening. I was talking to our colleague from the Caribbean region, and she was sharing that she came back from CSW and began to see, you know, on social media that there was a group of young feminists that were debriefing, even though they hadn't been at the session, on the outcomes of CSW. So I think at national level, it's about mobilizing, no, and organizing and gathering those who are interested to learn about the session, to hear about the outcomes. And there's always a responsibility when we have the privilege of going to New York, which is not only extremely expensive, but very limited, because we continue to see terrible issues of access because of visas, no, for many of our colleagues all around the world, receiving notice that they cannot even have a visa appointment for a year. So participation in CSW is a privilege. So if we are able to attend, we in some ways have that burden of responsibility, no, to disseminate the outcomes and experiences back at home. That's also the attempt, no, our intention behind the session today. So I would really encourage you, know, to organize and gather those who might be interested in having this conversation and checking to see if there's other youth that are already doing so. I'm just seeing one more message. Sorry, go ahead. Did someone unmute?
Yeah, sure. I equally just wanted to add to the question of how the youth can participate. The processes and the discussions, they begin quite early, just like we have already shared in terms of what next after CSW. So already there is a collection of data, the conversation that are going on, and also in terms of engaging the government on the commitment of the agreed conclusion. I think it is at that particular point in time where we need to pick the issues which are bordering on the young people, the youths, and begin to collect that data, basically that could be used for us as a testing point at CSW. I think what is also very, very important is to link up with the national networks that are happening already. For instance, we have the main engage Zambia Alliance, and we have different main engage alliances already that are sitting to discuss what are some of the issues that bordering on the youth and the youth participation. And from there, we can identify organizations like ours that already have experience in participating in a CSW, and we can have this begin to have this conversation on how we can actually help out in terms of the process and on how probably later on you arrive at CSW. What I've discovered is for governments, they would want actually to see your input. They would want to see what are you taking there? What is it that will be discussed? I think that is what is very, very important. And I think you get the support. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Raymond, making an excellent point. That's one of the main benefits of being in a collective such as Men Engage, to link up with Men Engage members within your country, check in to see if anyone was at CSW, and begin to use that network as a resource and support system. So thank you very much for that point. I'm just seeing in the chat just some ongoing concerns about Saudi Arabia presiding over the commission. A few years ago, Iran was expelled as a member of the commission of the status of women because of the atrocious violations against women's rights. Saudi Arabia as well, has quite a problematic record in this regard, and they are additionally stepping into chairing the negotiation. So the role is disproportionately more impactful. So just to let you know that there's already been quite a bit of thinking around how can we mobilize to put pressure on this decision, and ensure that we can try to limit the damage that takes place. So feminist organizing is happening and strategizing around what to do. I'm just seeing, Zakithi, your point that as a grassroots organization, you appreciated the space, but that you've already seen ways to continue to amplify, but also add, we need more grassroots voices contributing imperative expertise to the negotiations and the session more broadly, the discussions more broadly, I think that's absolutely true. One thing I always like to share with activists is it may seem like an intimidating process to engage in, but your experts are invaluable and essential, to ensuring that we have a great political outcome. So it's in some ways, we just have to find more ways to continue to organize and to amplify everyone's contributions within that space. And I think two more comments. CSW, your first time, Dorothy. It was a good experience just to have different people from different organizations. But we really need to engage youth engagement and platforms. And most people agreed on the youth 100%. I think it's taking root, the acknowledgement that our youth leaders are really essential to have in these spaces. taking the lead, no, on setting the political agendas to organize and contribute their voices. But we need to see more of that happen, as well as the financing for youth leaders to be able to do that work. But also the point that most people consider participation in CSW a key movement building time. No, we go there too, not just to advocate and hold the line on women's rights, but to also link up and learn and partnership build with everyone else in civil society, no, that's advancing these same aims. So in some ways that always emerges as one of the most important features of CSW, is that we're all together in the same space. We can strategize, think through what's ahead for the year, no, reflect on what's happened. So thanks for that point. And Genevieve, thanks for the reminder on Iran being expelled. Definitely, we should think about this with Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I think let's see how the advocacy unfolds, but keep note as the months pass by to see if there's opportunity for collective action that you can join, whether that be a statement or some advocacy lobby. We're 4 minutes over. Thank you very much for joining. We really appreciate your time. We will share the presentation, the video recording with everyone. And thank you. See you as we mobilize towards CSW69. No? Big appreciation to all the speakers today. Thanks so much for your expertise. Really appreciative of you taking the time, no, to share on what you learned and your challenges too within the space. Thank you. Good day.